Hey everyone, welcome to today's author interview where I'm interviewing writer, researcher, podcaster, and leading voice in systematic biblical paranormology, Ken Ammi, about all things interesting because as you'll find out, Ken has quite the message and is very well studied. Ken, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. I've been listening to you for a while now on many different podcasts, and I must say, every time you come on, every time I see your name pop up, I'm always excited. I always know it's going to be some good, juicy information and some fresh revelation coming from you.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And by the way, I guess it's easy to be the leading voice when you're like the only one.
I was hoping you were going to comment on that because I threw that in there for you. I love that term when you sent it to me in the email. I was like,
Right,
that is super cool, and I have to drop that on there.
right. Well, just so the audience knows, I didn't drop the term leading voice. I dropped the term systematic biblical paranormologist.
Yes.
It's like a true story, okay? One time I won first place at a martial arts competition for Chinese weapons.
Wow.
Now, before you get impressed, ask me how many people competed in that particular category.
How many people?
It was just me.
That's a great story. I love it.
Yeah, and they gave me like a 3 foot tall trophy. I'm not even kidding me. I was like, "Are you kidding? You're gonna give me this?" Like, well, you earned it. Oh, okay.
That's amazing.
So yeah, it's easy to be the leading voice, because
Yeah, that was my part I threw in. To me, you've earned it. I've heard you. When you gave me that term, I was like, you know what? That's a great term to describe his studies and what he does. And like, I'm going to say he's the leading voice in it because I believe that. So that's where that came from.
that was great.
Right on, right on. Well, good deal, man. Well, I'm going to go ahead and launch us in here. I'm going to ask you, this is a question. It's a personal studies of mine. If you don't have anything on it, you don't have to answer it, but I like to ask this question in interviews. What are your personal thoughts and study and research on King Solomon?
Well, I'm aware that we have the bits that we have about him in the Bible and the book he wrote. And then I'm aware of much, what appears to be much later folklore about him, as far as I know, which purports to detail for us the specific occult practices he performed. So, based on the Bible, you could definitely say he was into occultism, at least during the mid to late part of his life. But what exactly he was doing, we're not told. So then it seems to me, and this is kind of typical of maybe what I'll call historical fiction, is people like to find gaps and then they fill them. Now, they might fill them centuries later or millennia later, but they'll fill them. So that somebody would think exactly that way, or so it seems to me, is look, we're told Solomon um, had a period in his life where he went to worship other gods and he was worshiping idols and all this stuff. And so, what did that look like? Oh, I know. I'll make up stories about how he had this magical ring and that demons were doing his bidding and that this, that, and the other. Whatever validity that might have, I don't know if it has any. So, Solomon was King David's son, and he was tasked to do what God did not allow David to do, which is to build the temple. So God told David that, look, you're a man of blood, straight up, right? So I don't want you building my temple, right? So what God did is he gave David the plans. So then David gave the plans to Solomon, and Solomon took care of actually the building of it. And then Solomon became very wise. People sought his advice, and he gave opinions about various things. I mean, when you read the text he wrote, it's kind of like I have been there and done that type of tale, right? Where he's saying, I tried it all. I tried sorrow, I tried joy, I tried foolishness, I tried it all. I tried everything, drink, women, everything. And at the tail end of it, you can see that he's just kind of reconciling with the fact that he took this path very much away from God. And then at the end of his life, or like I said, mid to end, we don't know exactly when, but the way he ends his book is, this is the conclusion of the whole matter. The writing of, and I, as an author, I can definitely relate to this. Of the writing of books, there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And incidentally, in every single one of my books, that's on the title page. I quote it at the bottom.
That's awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for that answer. That was great. That was exactly what I was looking for. So I'm going to jump into question number 2 here. So I just want to say this. Your lineup of books is amazing. Like, as someone who interviews authors, as someone who's an avid reader, I was looking at it literally last night and I was like, oh my gosh, like this guy has an amazing lineup of books that just look absolutely phenomenal. So will you tell us about either something you just released or something you're about to release that you're just really passionate about and you're really into right now?
Well, I kind of wrote myself into a corner because I'm in the middle of 2 different series of books. So, yeah, my most recent publication is about Noah's flood, the deluge. And it's the kind of book I personally enjoy as a very kind of black and white researcher, because all I really did is tell you who took which view of it, whether it was local or global, throughout the centuries, going back to BC days. So for me, that's kind of fun because that's kind of the nerdy researcher in me, is just telling you, hey, I'm just telling you what other people are saying. Sure, I'm going to throw in a bunch of my comments along the way, but at least you get to learn historically who took which view of it. So that was volume 1. So that kind of tied me into, okay, now I have to produce a volume 2. You know? And I started working on it, but I've kind of been so busy. I hope nobody's noticing that I haven't published volume 2 quite yet. So then the other series I'm doing is a series of books reviewing movies that have alien and UFO themes. So for me, that's been a lot of fun. It's also a lot of tedious research, but a lot of fun, and getting to watch movies I haven't seen in a long time and discovering new ones. So I think the next one up is going to be volume either 4 or 5. And the nice thing about that one is, as long as I keep watching movies, I can just keep writing volume after volume, because I already have 3 that are almost ready to go. It's just a matter of putting the fine tuning on them and getting them ready. But that's been interesting, because when I write books about movie reviews, and I've published a few already, one on transhumanist themes in movies, one about the Alien and Predator franchises, and one about Stephen King's It. When I write those books, I'm not writing movie review books about like acting and cinematography and all of this stuff that I really don't care about. I'm more focused on the premise, the plot, and especially the world view that's behind it and the worldview that's being put forward to us through these movies. So, for instance, looking at the alien and UFO movies, there's definite patterns. I mean, sometimes I'm like, I can't believe I have to repeat myself, because the thing that this movie says is just like the other one and the other one, even if they're decades apart, because there's definitely certain patterns in them.
That's amazing.
Well, look, I wrote a book that's actually about the phenomena. I called it 50 Shades of Grey, Aliens. Okay, so now that's the serious research book, and kind of the conclusions I came into looking at what's supposed to be the real data is the same patterns I'm seeing in the movies, and it's actually the same patterns I see when I research transhumanism, and that is some combination of the occult and evolution and high tech. Those three are never far apart from each other, whether you're looking at transhumanism or the alien and UFO phenomena.
That's amazing. With all your research, you would say when those 3 things are together and you see them coming together, that's kind of the narrative being painted and where this thing's kind of heading.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, there's a direct correlation between transhumanism and the alien UFO phenomena, and I would maybe term, as I have in cases, term it transalienism. So, I mean, yeah, those three elements are essentially joined at the hip.
That's amazing. Well, good deal. Well, I'm going to jump on into the next question right here. This is more in time sort of stuff. So, what are your thoughts on the mark of the beast? Like what it is, or what it could be, or what it could evolve into, or wherever you want to take it, feel free to take it where you want.
Yeah, I must say, eschatology is not really my thing. And the only thing I could say about the mark of the beast is, uh, well, what exactly it is something that has changed in terms of views or interpretations down through the years. And it always seems to match the latest high tech. People just gravitate towards that. Oh, initially, maybe it was a tattoo. Okay, well, then let's jump ahead quite a few millennia. Maybe during the 1970s, oh, it was a barcode because that was the latest high tech. And then a few, a decade or two later, 80s, early 90s, oh, it was a microchip. That's what it's going to be. And now people are talking about genetic editing or genetic manipulation. That they're just kind of jumping on the latest high tech bandwagon and continuing to change what it must be. So that would be really my only word on it is that I'm not sure if we. I mean, I understand the cautions, and I understand how there is technology that is very scary, and I kind of understand wanting to tie it in like that. So, for instance, you maybe people don't realize how fast things are changing. Just the other day, I was seeing that e-coin ATM kiosks are being installed into stores now. Yeah, that's here already, done deal. So what does that mean? I have no idea, but could that be the sort of thing that would eventually lead to that you can't buy or sell without a mark? I don't know, but I'm saying that might be kind of like a window into what it might be like to live in that kind of culture where it's that black and white. If you want to be able to buy and sell things, you're going to have to get whatever the mark is. And so at least we get some kind of ideas of what that would be like. Even something as low tech as I can't walk into Costco and purchase anything unless I'm a member. So, okay, I'm not saying Costco's satanic. I'm just saying that's just a little tiny idea of what that would be like, that I can't walk into a store and purchase something unless, right? Unless I've signed on the dotted line. And there's already stores that don't allow payments with cash. So all these things are just kind of hints and maybe just ideas about what that would be like. And the only other thing I might say about it is maybe we're too fixated on the mark because really it seems like it's more of a tripartite system where it's the name of the beast or the number of his name or the mark, right? So maybe if you're too fixated on the mark, you're going to miss out on the other two dangerous things that come right along with it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Well, that was perfect. I appreciate you answering that one for us. And I'm going to ask you this. I'm just going to throw this one out there because I would love for you to explain this in depth, as much depth as you would like to go into for the viewers. So, what is systematic biblical paranormology? Like, how would you define that? You can go as deep as you want or simple as you want. I love that term. And from the second you sent it to me in the email, I was like, I'm using that because that's super cool. But I want to hear how you define it.
Okay, let's start here. So it's because one of my main interests, one of them, is that I thought one day, okay, there's earth dwellers and then there's God, but then there's this whole in between realm. And I wanted to know about the beings who inhabit that in between realm. So that's what I call the paranormal. And I don't use the term supernatural because really there's only one supernatural being, and that's God, because everything else is the natural since it was created by God. So there's the normal and there's the paranormal, like a parallel, right? So, okay. And it doesn't surprise me that that ended up being a main interest of mine, given my background where, oh, when I was in sixth grade, I really loved going to this place called the library, that had these things called books. And you'd pull out this little drawer with little cards, index cards, and look at the Dewey Decimal System number. And I would go and look at books about witchcraft and cryptozoology and the supernatural, as they would term it, or paranormal and aliens and UFOs. And that's kind of been just an interest of mine ever since. So that when I started reading the Bible, I wanted to see what the Bible had to say about all of those beings. And so I wanted to write one book that was about angels, seraphim, cherubim, the devil, whatever else, Nephilim, spirits, demons, you name it, all of them. And I did that. I sat down and I went through what the Bible says about all of them. And eventually I wrote one book. And when I was done, I thought, whoa, this is like way too much. It's like a drink from the fire hose. So I ended up breaking that one up into a series that was more digestible. So now one book is what does the Bible say about angelology, what does the Bible say about angels, a styled angelology. And there's one just about demons, one just about giants and Nephilim, one just about Satan. So that kind of made it more digestible, I think. But see, because I did all of that research together, it forced me to systematize it. All those ologies, right? Angelology, demonology, Satanology, what I call nephilology, right? Giantology, all the ologies. Because it's easy to kind of come up with one and that sounds nice, but it doesn't connect to anything else. But so, like when you hear about systematic theology, well, theology is technically just the study of God. But in systematic theology, you have pneumatology, soteriology, eschatology. And the point is that you're supposed to systematize all of them together. That's systematic theology. So in my case, I'm glad I did it all together because it forced me to systematize everything. So to the best of my ability, with the little bit that the Bible says about these things, I think that I was able to come up with a coherent, systematic paranormology that's biblical. So that's kind of what sets me aside from just having the various ologies that don't connect to each other, or having, say, a view of angels based on what every person on the planet has ever said about them, which is another issue. I mean, I've done that kind of stuff too. Like I wrote a book titled The Apocryphal Nephilim and Giants, or The Apocryphal Jesus. It's just, what do non-biblical sources say about those things? Yeah, I don't mind doing that. I've done plenty of it. But my specialty has been an area which actually I find a lot of people believe what they believe, say about, let's just say, angels, based on common knowledge. And it seems to me common knowledge are those things everybody knows, but nobody knows how anybody knows. Because when you get detailed enough into angelology, you end up noticing that a lot of people hold a lot of very wrong views about them. And then I find that when I try to point these things out, for some odd reason, people just react very emotively. It's almost like they take it personally and they want to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about because everybody knows that X, right? And I'm saying, well, but everybody might be wrong about X. I'm just pointing out facts here. So that's what I mean by it, is that I'm taking all the various ologies about all these paranormal beings and putting them together into a narrative that seems to work.
Love it. So that's perfect. You going into all that leads me into my next question, which is right up your alley. So what are your thoughts or your explanation about Satan? Like who he is, what he is, how far back he goes, his relationship with God and the Son of God and the whole shebang. I just want you to kind of go in as far as you want on this one and tell us what you've found in your research.
Okay, good and interesting question, and also an issue about which there's a lot of confusion, like I stated, based on people claiming that we all know, but maybe it's not quite so. So, how far back he goes? Well, that's hard to say. I mean, in Job 38:7, we have it that the sons of God rejoiced at witnessing the creation of the earth. So, well, it doesn't tell us who the sons of God are, but they're obviously not human. We could at least go that far. And so, I mean, okay, the Septuagint, the LXX, the Greek version has angelos for sons of God there. So it's, I guess, interpreting for us that they're being viewed as angels, whatever. So I think it'd be fair to say that angels, cherubim, and seraphim were created before the creation of the earth. How far before it, I have no idea. I don't know if that's terribly important. So we come to our first misconception, dun, 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 which is that in primordial times, before the creation of the earth, there was a war in heaven, and Satan was kicked out of heaven, and that's why he's tempting Eve in the garden, right? Well, there's no such biblical teaching like that. What we do have in Revelation 12 is that at some point, Satan does something that causes a third of the angels to fall, right? It's symbolically depicted as a dragon casting them to earth with his tail. Okay, so, but the war itself takes place after Jesus' resurrection, ascension. Now, at that point, you know, people can fight it out in terms of eschatology or preterism. Did it already happen? Is it yet to happen? That's a separate issue, but it was a post-Jesus ascension event, the war in heaven itself. So Satan and angels did fall before that, that's for sure. I'm just focusing on the war itself. That's after Jesus' ascension. So then when we look at texts in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14, some would question whether those have to do with Satan, but I'm thoroughly convinced, and I actually took a chapter of my Satanology book and I released it online just as an article. If someone's interested in that, just look up The Apocalypse of the Hidden Hand. And that kind of goes into the reasons why I think those two texts do talk about Satan. So I'll just leave it at that. So what they're telling us is, here's another misconception about Satan. Satan is not a fallen angel because he's not an angel. He's a cherub. So he's a fallen cherub, and cherubim are not angels by definition. Angels are angels, cherubim are cherubim. That's a categorization based on the law of identity. One is one and the other is the other. And so he's a cherub, okay? And what we're told is that he was, like the cherubim are, around God's throne. The scholarly literature refers to cherubim as throne guardians, and you kind of understand why. So, for example, when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, God stationed cherubim to guard the way. So you can kind of see them performing these guardian type actions. Okay, and so interestingly, you had a cherub causing the problems in the garden, and so God stations two cherubim at the garden. So it was kind of like, you know what? It's 2 against 1, buddy. Just like the angels, when you think about it, a third fell, well, 2/3 didn't. So everyone's outnumbered on our behalf, you know. Okay, so to me, it seems that what I call the original rebellion took place within the mind of this cherub, where he thought to himself, I will be like the Most High, right? The 5 I wills of Satan, I'm sure you've heard about. And so if you notice, he takes that rebellious thought of his and he introduces it to Eve. You will be as God, right? So People say Satan hasn't had an original idea in millennia, and the sad thing is he hasn't had to, because the first one worked so well, right? And so, yeah, it seems to me that Satan had this sinful conception, this idea, but then when he acted on it was in the garden. So I think Genesis 3 is actually recording for us the time of his fall. Because there's no reason to think that he had already fallen. I think that's the thing that he did that caused him to be considered fallen. Okay, so then he's still allowed back into heaven or before God, or however you want to call it. Because, for instance, in Job chapters 1 and 2, the sons of God come before God and Satan comes along with them. And there are other scenes in the Bible where you see Satan interacting with God. So for me, there's a difference, and it may be clunky in English, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, fallen is different from being cast out. So fallen means he was fired from his original job. Let's put it that way, right? Then he does something that causes a third of angels to fall. And I think that fall of angels is recorded in Genesis 6. Okay. And that would take us into a whole different context, but that's how I see the timeline playing out. So then, yeah, you have Satan, who's a cherub, who is not an angel, so he most likely could not have done the things that were done in the Genesis 6 affair, because he's physically different than angels. So even if he tried, he probably wouldn't have been able to. But anyhow, whatever he does, kind of nudged them into falling and committing their own sin. And so what we see, let's jump all the way to the eschaton. Again, let's go back to Revelation 12. Eventually, at some point, he and the fallen angels decide to get in a ruckus with Michael and the loyal angels, and they get defeated. And then Satan is actually cast out of heaven, cast to the earth, and that's it. He's stuck here. There's no longer going up before God to do anything, right? He's stuck. And that's when he's really, really angry. But incidentally, that brings me to an interesting point, because there's so many things he does that seem like they don't make sense. And I've heard people say, well, but when a person's really angry, they tend to do things that don't make any sense. And I could see that, but it really helped my Satanology when, instead of thinking of Satan as being really angry, I started thinking of him as being insane. Okay, and then that made a lot more sense. Why would somebody do things that on the surface seem really rational and like really intelligent, but bottom line is they were just good old-fashioned dumb things to do? How it doesn't make any sense.
That's hilarious. I love your point about the people saying he's never created anything, and you make a great point there. Because even Jesus said he was the father of lies, which in my mind, in my studies, like I took that as like he invented lies, and that actually is a crazy invention if you think about it. Or he was the first person to discover it. Kind of like we discovered electricity. The way Jesus says that he's the father of lies, to me means like he discovered that ability and then like passed it along. And so, I mean, you are correct in like the insanity. Like there's levels there in what you're saying that are so deep and so true about people that pull things off like this, and then knowing that God knows all, knowing the position that he was in with God, and then trying to still pull it off. There is a level of just downright, it's not just he's angry making bad decisions. It's like, no, there's a level of something's not all clicking there. You know what I mean?
You're right. So I think you're very right. He's a liar, and what we found is that he told that lie to Eve, right? So from the very beginning, and then in John 8, it states that he was a murderer from the beginning. Now, when as a Jew, when I thought about that, well, what does it mean? He was a murderer from the beginning. And then I focused on the word beginning and I thought of it in Hebrew, Bereshit. And then I thought, well, Bereshit, that's the name of the first book of the Torah, the Genesis. And then I thought, oh, he was a murderer ever since Genesis. Oh, well, what's in Genesis 3? Well, you might say he didn't commit literal murder, but by doing what he did, he brought death to Adam and Eve through the fall.
Wow. That's some good research right there. That's amazing.
Well, see, I appreciate you say that because if you notice, I'm not making up any fancy stuff. I'm just saying, hey, this is what the Bible says. That's it.
Right, absolutely. That's one reason I'm having you on too, is because I'm real big on that. Like with my podcast, like I like to have people on that are well studied, well researched, and do their best to stick to the Bible. You know, they aren't just like pulling stuff out of all these crazy. They at least try their hardest to stick to the Bible. I'll say that. You know.
Well, I always say, look, I don't mind speculating, but when I'm speculating, I'm going to let you know I'm speculating. But to me, it's enough that I'm able to point right to the word and say, look, it says this, it says that, and it says the other. My job is just to kind of systematize it so that you end up going, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I'm a big believer. The Word of God, it houses, I mean, even like you're saying, just the Hebrew words, like house the secrets of the universe. You could probably unveil every secret of the universe just in the words of the Hebrew. I mean, it's truly remarkable, much less of the stories and the parables and the revelations and the way things happen. And God allowed things to happen in certain ways to bring forth certain wisdom to the people that would read the stories. I mean, there's depths and depths and depths of the intelligence level of God and the way that he can deliver information to people with clarity. It's just like beyond anything we could imagine, really.
Right. And so that's part of the systemization. Like I said, we're told precious little about paranormal issues in the Bible. So that was one of the things I really focused on is, well, wait a minute. When we're told really a little bit about something, we need to make sure we get it right. And we're handling it carefully and we're connecting things that actually connect, not just kind of glossing over or just trying to super glue stuff together.
That's really good. And I would have to agree completely. I mean, obviously, in your research and the time you've spent articulating what you found to others, you've dealt with this. But even growing up in church, when you find certain things and you relay that information to people and it doesn't fit with like what their grandma or grandpa told them or what their pastor when they were in Bible school or their youth pastor told them, you're right, like a war ensues.
Yeah.
And they don't even some of them don't even read the Bible. They don't even read it they're like, well, my dad told me. It's like, well,
Right.
wait a second.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
I actually researched this stuff. Like your dad, you haven't even read it. You know, that we've run into that.
Yeah.
So I know you've dealt with your fair share of all that mess, but I'm going to jump us on in here to the next question. So this is something that I'm going to kind of let you take wherever you want. It's just a question I like to ask people. It's what are your thoughts on salvation? Like on what it is, what it isn't, you know, what it entails and encompasses in full and in its totality. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, for one, in a way, that's a gigantic topic. And in another way, it's very simple, right? Like I heard somebody who gave a testimony saying, I sinned, Jesus saved, period. Okay, yeah, that's good. So that's kind of like a bottom line type of thing that I really like. But, sometimes I've thought to myself, why should I dislike anybody? Because really, I know a person who's wronged me more than anybody else and who's lied to me more than anybody else, let me down more than anybody else, betrayed me, caused me problems. And that person's me. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm unique, but I definitely recognize that about myself. No matter how many good things I do, that's still a fact. I'm my own worst enemy. There's just no question about it. So then, the funny saying we have, which is, "Oh, I couldn't help myself." Well, I literally couldn't help myself, right? So then, what happens when you're honest enough to look at yourself and go, "Yep, I've done blown it. Blown it again. I, caused all this problem to myself and others. And yeah, maybe I can make things right with this or that person, but can I ever make things right with myself? Because I'm not into kidding myself and telling myself that, well, deep down, I'm really not like this, or deep down, I'm really completely different than every bit of evidence would indicate. No, I'm just like, you know what? Yeah, this is me. Yeah, and it sucks. So, I mean, that's just kind of the way we face what we view as our sin is, well, that's been the problem. I'm the one doing these things. Sometimes it's because I'm heavily tempted. Just sometimes it's because I just good old fashioned feel like it. Yeah, it's that bad. It's that bad. Um, Sometimes for what I call enjoyment, and sometimes out of habit, whatever it may be. I mean, ultimately, um, you can say the devil made me do it. You can say all that stuff, but ultimately, it's you. And you're the person you have to face in the mirror and hopefully be honest enough about to say, "Yep, that's me. I did it, and I'm responsible." And now what? Because I can't seem to maintain this kind of walk of holiness long enough to seem as if I'm born again. And I've heard an interesting saying, Christians aren't sinless, but they should sin less, right? Okay, I get all that. I get all the do the God stuff, go to church, read your Bible, put the little fish on your bumper of your car. I get all that. I get all of it. But ultimately, it's when we recognize, you know what, there's something wrong with me and it's deep and it's not going away. And yeah, so then um, um, I'll come at this from a different context as an example, which is that the guy that officiated the wedding ceremony for my sister, I got to talk to him a little bit afterwards, and he was saying that he's Jewish also, but he's kind of agnostic and he's interested in Buddhism. And I'm trying to talk to him, and meanwhile, my mom is waving me on, like, "Come on, we got to get to the reception. Come on, come on." And I'm thinking, well, what can I tell this guy in a couple minutes? So I just told him two things. Is one, if there is no God, or if God is not a personal being, then all the suffering our people have been through the millennia is like for nothing, right? So then, as I personally myself pondered the suffering our people have been through, and my Goyim friends, my Gentile friends, feel free to apply that to yourselves because we've all been through suffering of various sorts, persecutions and everything. As well, um, there's either an ultimate redeemer or there's this sort of atheistic, nihilistic, too bad, deal with it, such as life, eat and drink for tomorrow we die, um, which in a way it makes evil, pain, and suffering be for nothing. And in a way, it actually makes it good because it rids us of the less fit. Right. So then you kind of get into this where if I want to conclude, well, then there must be an ultimate redeemer, then the question becomes, yeah, but just because you think that's a nice answer or solution, is that the actual truth? So that would be like a whole different discussion about epistemology and all of that. But ultimately, the question was the premise of salvation. So we're granting that is a thing already. So fortunately, I don't have to go down that heavy philosophical road because you granted it to me already. So when it comes to salvation, what we find, going back to Genesis 3, like we already talked about a little bit, there's something really interesting there where Eve is told that her seed would crush Satan's head, the seed of the woman. And so what you see in that is what has been traditionally called the proto-evangelium. And incidentally, don't confuse that with an apocryphal book called proto-evangelium. It just means like the prototype of the evangel, of the gospel, right? The good message, the good news. So like a prototype, it's like a basic model because it's telling us what? Well, someday there's going to become someone that's going to be the seed of the woman somehow down the line, and he's going to defeat the guy we've been talking about that initiated all this mess in the first place by lying and committing, what we might call symbolic murder, or however we might want to term it. And so that basic level message has been available on earth ever since the two first people who ever existed. It's been here. Right? I mean, so maybe it's been manipulated or corrupted in one way or another, but the basic message has been there. And so what we ended up finding out is that salvation is not of ourselves, because he's going to be the one to do that. So we ought to strive as the best as we possibly can, but we're not going to get the job done. But that means we still strive as much as humanly possible to be holy. For instance, I've heard people say, well, nobody's perfect. And they usually say that in order to excuse some kind of behavior. And I always want to butt in and say, well, wait a minute, hold on. God is perfect. Okay, so if my mindset is nobody's perfect, therefore that excuses whatever on earth I feel like doing. It's like, well, wait a minute. God is perfect, and I'm never going to be God. And this side of heaven, never going to be perfect. But since that's my goal, that's what I strive to. So that if I fall along the way, and I will, then I get up and I continue down that road of perfection, because that's my end goal. So then, but we're never going to reach that perfection, which is why we needed an ultimate redeemer in the first place. And so he's going to be the one that will come here and do what we can't, really. So then we end up realizing that salvation is like a gift, and a gift isn't something when you receive it, you say, darn right, I earned that. I deserve that. Oh, yeah, you owe me that. No, that's not a gift. The gift is like, wow, thank you so much. You gave me something. I didn't earn it. I didn't deserve it. But right, you just gave it to me and I received it, and I thank you for that. And that's what we're told basically in the Bible in terms of we're saved by grace through faith, and that it's the gift of God, not of works, right? It's totally like God's covenant with Abraham. It's all one-sided. It's all God's doing, right? God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And his son came to earth, and he does what? Well, I'm here as a servant. I'm here to do God's will. So that's basic line salvation, is that Jesus came here to do what we couldn't do and what some of us don't want to do, right? Right. We don't want to go through that kind of life of attempting to do this perfect thing, knowing that we're going to fail. And then what do we do when we fail? All these things that I talked about. It's like, well, that's what he came here to do. So that would be salvation, is that the one who could do it did it, and now he says, here's my gift.
Wow. I love that. That was great. That was an excellent answer. I appreciate you sharing all that with us, because that was very well said. And from there, I'm going to kind of swing us into a little different category, but it's right up your alley. I'm just going to ask you this and keep it broad, and you can shrink it down or make it as broad as you want. But what is your understanding from your research on the Genesis 6 narrative?
You seem to think a lot of things are down my alley.
Well, I mean, I looked at your book list, and then I've heard you on probably 5 or 6 different podcasts, and I was like, you can really ask this guy anything. I was writing out your questions, and I was like, I could really ask him like absolutely anything.
Yeah.
But I was like, I'm going to try to ask some that are kind of off the wall that I hadn't heard you answer, and then some that are kind of more, down a certain path that a lot of
Right.
people are into now. So
Right. Okay, so Genesis 6, I call it the Genesis 6 affair. And I would assume we're talking about the first 4 verses because the rest of it has to do with the flood. So I'm going to assume yeah. So one of the first issues is that those 4 little verses, and maybe we could kind of set aside verse 3 because it talks about the 120 years. So let's just say 3 verses. Have led to centuries, have led to millennia worth of debate and interpretation and speculation, mostly because it talks about the sons of God. So you have to ask, who are they? The daughters of men, that might be easier. And then the Nephilim, who are they? And then what are the days? What are afterwards? What do all these things mean? And so that's one of the interesting things is when I wrote a book about that, I thought, well, I'm done. I mean, how much am I going to write about this tiny little topic? Well, now I'm about 9 books into that issue. So let's say, first of all, one of the questions would be, who are the sons of God? Okay, now, I wrote a whole book just like I did with the Noah's flood. Similar kind of thing. I wrote a book just giving you a chronology of who took which view of that from a couple hundred years BC until maybe just past 500 AD. So almost a whole millennia's worth of who took which view, Jews and Christians. And it's just unquestionable that the original, the traditional, and the majority view amongst both the earliest Jews and Christians is that sons of God there refers to angels. Now, someone might say, well, I don't care what the majority says. That's an argumentum ad populum and all that stuff. It's like, okay, maybe that's a different issue, but I'm just saying chronologically who took which view, that is the majority view, and there's no question about it. So that's my book on the Genesis 6 affairs, sons of God, angels or not. Because traditionally the view is that they're angels, but then those who say that they're not, a very minor view was that they were noble men, right? Some kind of nobility, maybe judges even. And then a latecomer view is that they were Sethites. That got really popularized. He didn't invent it, but it really got popularized with Augustine of Hippo. So that actually means you have a ton of people from before him who commented on this. Like I said, from BC days to the earliest parts of the AD days up until his time. So why think that they're angels? Well, because there are other texts that seem to inform us that sons of God can refer to angels. So like I mentioned earlier, Job 38:7 has the sons of God witnessing the creation of the earth. So like I even said back then, we can't necessarily say that they're angels, but we at least have to admit that they're not human. So then it's easier to open the door for that they're angels. And so that would lead to a view that, angels mated with human women and they produce offspring. So that raises a lot of questions. And I'm not sure how many you want me to get into, but the one important thing to learn about angels, one of the misconceptions is that they are spirits. And I'm emphasizing the word because a lot of people confuse spirit with spiritual. And those two are very different. Spirit would mean disembodied entities, right? It'd be like a mind without a brain type of scenario. Whereas a spirit can become embodied, like humans are body, soul, and spirit, but God is a spirit proper. So, what we find in the Bible is that angels look just like human males. And there's no indication whatsoever anywhere that this is not their ontological state, that this is not how they naturally are, that they somehow morph or a shapeshift or they take on human bodies or anything like that. There's nothing like that in the entire Bible, period, full stop. So if the Bible consistently describes them as looking like human males and they're doing physical stuff like walking on the ground or wielding weapons or eating, then why would I throw that away for a common knowledge view that, well, I have to invent all this stuff? They're actually spirits. They take on bodies when they have to interact with us. All this stuff that has to be invented, you know. And again, I could go into a sideline here about whether they're actually called spirits or not. But what I'm saying is that even if you think that based on one or two verses, you still have to face the fact that you shouldn't throw away the many times they're described as looking exactly like human males without indication that they kind of change from what they naturally are. So then that opens the door to, well, okay, if they look just like human males, we could understand how they could mate with human women. And I mean, like I said, there's a lot of details we could get into, and I get into all that stuff in my books. So then what ends up happening is they give birth to these people called Nephilim. And now linguistics has caused a lot of confusion in this area because in some English Bibles, the word Nephilim is rendered, okay, not even translated, it's rendered by the English word giant. That has caused a tremendous amount of problems and confusions, and I could get into all that if you want to.
Yeah, feel free to take it wherever you want. I'm just letting you run with it, so it's your show.
Yeah, so when we're focused on Genesis 6, guess what? Let's assume that the word giant forces us to conclude that they were unusually tall. That alone raises some problems. One would be, what does tall mean? What does giant mean? Because those are subjective terms, right? And then it's also a word concept fallacy where you think, oh, I know that they were physically unusually tall because the word giant is used of them. Whereas you could say something like, oh, Elon Musk is a giant of industry. Well, that doesn't tell you anything about his physicality, does it? So I'm just saying it's not necessarily the case that a word has to be taken in whichever way you feel like interpreting it, right? Because giant, tall, or big, it's just subjective. And not necessarily, because my point is, if you read Genesis 6, it doesn't physically describe them, period. It just tells us something about their rep, right? It tells us that they were um, mighty men of renown. So they were mighty. We don't even know how or why, but they were mighty and they were well known. That's what we're told about them.
Right. One thing I love about you, and I know that you are a researcher and you research a lot because you have differing views than like the mainstream, which I love because I love talking to actual researchers who gather their own conclusions out of the word and don't just, watch a few YouTube videos and then and then start like proclaiming to be an expert on these topics. So I appreciate and can tell you're very well researched, and I've been able to tell listening to you on other podcasts that you're just really well studied and that you're not swayed by just the mainstream opinion or belief. Like you study it out for yourself and you draw your own conclusions with the mind God has given you, and you come up with something very sound. And honestly, it's really powerful. I love your views on all this stuff.
you're way too kind. But I appreciate what you're saying. And part of me is thinking, hey, you haven't closed the loop on this issue. You're leaving out this and that stuff. So it kind of makes me want to tie a nice bow on this.
Hey, absolutely. Go for it.
Okay, well, then I'll just throw this in because the bottom line is biblically, there's precisely two verses that mention Nephilim. Not even two texts. We're just talking about two sentences. That's it. That's it. Okay. And so remember what I said when we're told precious little about something, let's make sure that we understand the little bit we're told and we're handling it very carefully. So, for example, what I didn't mention is that the Genesis 6 affair took place pre flood, right? Because I did point out that the rest of Genesis 6 is about the flood. So then, okay, Nephilim lived pre flood. So what happened to them? Well, logically, the last of them would have drowned to death. Period. End of story. Right? There's some 5 verses throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament, that tell us that the survivors of the flood were Noah, his family, and some animals. So then there are people who claim the Nephilim survived, and that's just a straight up contradiction of 5 different texts or 5 verses. Just straight up. That's it. Okay. But I can hear somebody saying, well, wait a minute. It says that Nephilim were in the earth in those days and also after that. So that means after the flood. Okay, well, wait a minute. That's not what that verse says. It doesn't mention the flood whatsoever. In fact, that's verse 4. The flood isn't mentioned for the very first time until verse 17. That's a full 13 verses later. So you have to be careful about these fast talkers because it's easy to just go along with that and say, but wait a minute. And I've had this conversation with people dozens and dozens of times when they tell me it's referring to the flood. And I say, well, quote it. You'll notice it doesn't say that. And sadly, because they want to force it to be about the flood, they miss that the verse tells you exactly to what days it's talking about. It says, the Nephilim were in the earth in those days and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men who bore children by them, right? So it's telling you, it's talking about the days when that happened initially, and then that it kept happening. So, I mean, they kept doing it. So the question becomes, well, when was that? Well, verse 1 told you, when men began to multiply upon the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair and took them wives, right? So the question becomes, when was that? Well, I have no idea. I mean, it could have been as early as when Adam and Eve's children started having children, but we know that it was pre-flood, and we know the text is telling us that it resulted in Nephilim when they initially did that, and then that they kept doing it, except the flood brought an end to all of it. Okay, so now let's look at on the view that the sons of God were angels. Well, what happened to them at the flood? Well, both Jude and Peter, 2 Peter 2, tell us that God incarcerated them. Okay, now they don't tell us when God incarcerated them. But to me, it's logical that if God is cleaning house, in a manner of speaking, through the flood, then it makes sense that would have been the time. I mean, why clean house and then leave this mess on the side, right? So let's hold on to that for just a second, and then think about how Jude and Peter are telling us about angels that sinned. Well, if Genesis 6 is not talking about the fall of angels and sons of God does not refer to angels, then I have no idea what Jude and Peter are talking about. Where is the sin of angels in the whole entire Bible if it's not Genesis 6? Where is it? Nobody would know what they were talking about, right? And then, I forget which one it is, but one of them kind of lays out what I think of as a chronology. when they're talking about sin and they're talking about the sinful angels, then they're talking about the flood, then they're talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. So they're placing the sin of angels to pre-flood days, which nicely fits the Genesis 6 timeline. Okay. So now we come to post-flood, Numbers 13, verse 32 and 33, where guess what? The Nephilim are mentioned. So now you got an issue. How are you going to deal with that? How did they make it past the flood? We know they didn't survive. So then how did they come back? Well, now you have to invent a bunch of unbiblical tall tales about how angels kept on incursions, they're called, more incursions of angels, more fallen angels, doing it all again. Okay, that's a theory, but it's totally not in the Bible, period. And nowadays, these things kind of go in trends. So nowadays, if you really want to be cool, what you'll say is that pagans were performing occult rituals that raised the dead spirits of Nephilim and, possess people or whatever. That's the cool, hip, new thing. And partly that's because some people do believe that unclean spirits, aka demons, are the spirits of dead Nephilim. Now, that's something based on two pseudepigraphical texts, and that's Jubilees and First Enoch, aka Ethiopic Enoch. They both state that. But okay, that's from millennia after the Torah was written. And during the Second Temple era, which is an era notorious for wild speculation, folklore, historical fiction, and all of this stuff. So I think that's not a bad guess, actually, as to who demons are. But I came up with a biblical theory about who demons are. And of course, it's in my book on demonology. Or I published an article online people can look up quite easily called Demons Ex Machina. What are demons? But okay, so that would be a side issue. What we're talking about right now is how Nephilim made it post-flood. They didn't survive, and we're not told any way whatsoever that they somehow returned. Oh, incidentally, before I forget, because I did, and I just remembered. Another tall tale is that the Nephilim actually survived the flood, but just genetically within the DNA of one of Noah's son's wives. So basically, I would say that that's one of example of a theory that implies that God failed. Yeah, he really wanted to do away with them, but by golly, he missed this loophole. Oh, wow, look at that. So yeah, there's no indication of that. That's just another neo-theo sci-fi tall tale is what I'll call it. Okay, so then still you have this reference to them in Numbers 13, specifically 33. So how did they get there? Besides all the things you have to invent and all the contradictions you have to make and all the implications that God failed that you have to bring into this. Okay, so preferably what I'll call the pop researchers, and actually some of the scholars too, would prefer that you do is that you pick up one single verse, 1333, and you run with it. That's it. Right? Forget context, forget interacting with the text. Just pick up one verse, accept it, and run with it, and make it the key premise for an all-encompassing theory. So let's go through that a little bit now. Okay. So the narrative of number 1333 is when the 12 spies are sent out into the land of Canaan to spy it out. They come back, they for a report of the land. So there's two reports in that chapter. The first one I call the original report, and it's accepted as is. They talk about the fruit of the land. They talk about how it's a good land. But they describe that there are various people groups in the land that are strong people and they live in big, well fortified cities. So, I mean, that seemed to be pretty intimidating to what were then itinerant tent wilderness dwellers, being told, hey, yeah, you've fought people before, but you're going to have to face like five different people groups that are strong and well fortified. It's like, oh boy, you know. And so Caleb seems to discern this reaction of fear. So the first thing he does is kind of like say, get her done, right? We can do this, no problem. God commanded us to, and he's got our back. That's a loose paraphrase, you know. And then we end up finding out that Joshua sided with Caleb. So then we have the 12 spies. We have two on one side, 10 on the other one. Now the 10 start dissuading the people from doing that which God commanded them to do by saying, no, we're not going to be able to do it. Why? Because they're stronger than we are. So at the very least, now we can identify those 10 as unfaithful and disloyal. But then the narrative specifies to us, then they brought an evil report. And then it quotes the evil report. And so when people say, hey, Numbers 13:33 refers to post-flood Nephilim, let's run with it. It's like, wait a minute, but you're quoting what the narration is telling us is an evil report. And now, I believe the report is a falsehood, but I don't believe it's a falsehood because of what it's termed, that it's called bad or evil. I believe it's a falsehood because of its contents. Because they make five assertions about which the whole entire Bible knows nothing. Okay, so they say, for one, that the land is bad, right? The land devours its inhabitants. Well, that's a straight up contradiction of the original report that had the land being good, right? So now they're not only unfaithful and disloyal, they're contradictory. And then they say, oh, and all the people in the land are of great stature. Well, wait a minute. That's an embellishment at the very least, because the original report said they were strong. And even you guys said we won't be able to come up against them because they're stronger than we. All of a sudden, you're embellishing. You're going to tell us that they're all very tall. So at least now they're unfaithful, disloyal, contradictory, and embellishers. And then comes the infamous verse 33, and there we saw the Nephilim. And then, well, translations vary, but basically, oh, and the sons of Anak, right, the Anakim, who come from the Nephilim, and they were so tall that basically we felt like grasshoppers next to them, type of thing. Yeah. So the thing is, when you look at it in that light, and I could bore you with many more points about how what they're saying is completely unreliable, including some textual issues. Basically, you have them claiming that they saw Nephilim, and you have them claiming Anakim are related to Nephilim, and that Nephilim are very, very, very tall. Okay, so think about that. Post-flood Nephilim, that there are post-flood people who are related to Nephilim, and that Nephilim are very, very, very tall. Those are absolutely the three key features of modern day pop nephilology. But guess what? They're basing all of that on one single verse, a single verse stated by absolutely unreliable guys, a single verse quoted within an evil report by guys whom God rebukes. God rebukes them. And we're going to take that one statement and make it the key feature upon which we build an entire all-encompassing theory. I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, the conclusion to the question, how did Nephilim make it past the flood, is they didn't. And that these guys were just deceivers. They just made it up. It was a scare tactic. It was a fear-mongering scare tactic, like don't go in the woods type of story, you know? Ooh, we saw the Nephilim there, and everybody's super tall. And there's people related to them. And all of that, in my mind, for many reasons I haven't even bothered mentioning, was just a straight up deception. That's all it was.
That's so good. I love that. I've heard you break that down once before, and I just love your clarity you have on that and the way that you frame that. It's so accurate. The word of God says they brought an evil report. And
Right.
you're right. It's more than just like, oh, like they were, whatever. It's like, no, like this is assigning to the whole report that it was an evil report and it wasn't to be trusted. That was
Yeah,
the whole essence of the whole thing is God rebuked the entire nation and made them stay in the wilderness because they trusted this
that's
evil
right.
report that
That's
shouldn't
right.
have been trusted.
And frankly, I almost think that there's a sense of spiritual warfare in that because the people who believe in post flood Nephilim, man, they get, I mean, rabidly angry when I make these points to them. I don't know, it has to be a spiritual warfare thing. So let me just tie a little bow on the end of it, which would be to say these guys also contradict Moses, Caleb, Joshua, God, and the entire rest of the Bible because all of those affirm that people such as the Anakim were in the land, but never say one single word about Nephilim, period, never, not once. And the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, so many of these guys were told, hey, when you go to the land, you're going to encounter these people groups. Not a single word about Nephilim ever, right? We have descriptions of people in the land and outside the land. Not a single word about Nephilim. We have descriptions of wars and even hand-to-hand combat. Not a single reference to Nephilim ever, period, full stop. And incidentally, don't say, well, but my English Bible uses the word giant pre-flood and it uses the word giant post-flood. That's a complete linguistic mess that was made by some of the renderers slash translators. But just focus on the fact that if you look behind the English word giant, you're going to find in modern times in your Bible, it either is rendering Nephilim or Rephaim. And there's no correlation between the two whatsoever, despite what the pop researchers say nowadays.
Yeah. That's so good. I love that. I appreciate you sharing all that with us because I know that's many, many, many hours of research and study and thought. And like you said, systematizing everything
Right.
and understanding everything on a really deep level. And so I appreciate you sharing that with us. So I'm going to go in. We probably have time for one, maybe two more questions. I'm going to ask you, I'll actually do a little curveball and let you pick one of these two to answer. So this one is, what are your thoughts on like how Satan entered Judas, or do you believe he entered into Judas?
Oh,
That's something that's just always bothered me. I'm like, wait, what is this? Like what? There's something there that I just have never just been able to click with me. So I would love to ask you that. Or I was going to ask you, how do you think the Antichrist is birthed? Like, is it through, what you think the process of that? So you could pick one of those two.
okay. Yeah, no question about it. How Satan entered Judas.
Perfect. All right. That's the one I wanted you to pick. So,
Because I had to deal with that. It's fascinating. I don't even know why that would be an issue for you, but it shows that you've definitely done some deep research and thinking to the point that that would even become a question for you. So, yeah, oh man, that's good. Because while I was doing my Satanology, I remember telling my wife that that was an issue for me. And boy, I spent days thinking about it, just racking my brain. And my wife is like, man, you think about some weird stuff. But I did. I spent days on that question. And then guess what? The solution was when I actually paid attention to what the Bible actually tells us, the answer was right there in front of my eyes. So now I know that it'd be easy for us to say, well, look, demons enter people, so Satan entered people. Okay, but Satan isn't a demon, so let's be careful with our category errors, right? So, oh, well, but Satan, I mean, demons are spirits and Satan is a spirit. So they could do the same kind of stuff. Well, are you sure Satan is a spirit? So, what I said about angels, which is that they're described physically with no indication that they're not, then I would say the same thing about cherubim and seraphim. All of them are physical, even if it's like a physicality of flesh of their own kind or sort. Still, um, I'd say that they're very much like us, except they have access to what we might term dimensions or realms. And so when we're talking about, well, how could, what, let's just say that we're granting that Satan is fleshly or physical, then how does one physical being enter another one? And, we're not talking about the Genesis 6 affair here. We're talking about different kind of gabish. So yeah, how does that happen? So that's when it became an issue for me right there. It's like, well, how did that happen? Well, guess what? When I took seriously that Satan is a cherub, then I thought, well, what precious little are we told about cherubim? And then I'm thinking, well, Ezekiel chapters 1 and 10 tell us the most about cherubim. And it tells us that there's this animated throne, I guess we could say, a throne that is seen in a vision to be flying. And obviously God is on his throne. And around it are cherubim, right? The throne guardians. But guess what? Then there's also the Ophanim, which is generally translated as the wheels within wheels.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And get this, okay? Are you ready for this? Ezekiel specifies that the spirit of the cherubim were within the Ophanim. Okay? So that tells us that cherubim have this ability to have their spirits leave their bodies and enter some sort of an object, right? So there you have it. That is how Satan, the cherub, could be a physical being, but have his spirit leave his body and enter into Judas.
Wow. That's amazing. I've never heard that, and that just answered a great question for me. So I'm very, very appreciative. So I don't have to, my head doesn't have to hurt for another 2 years thinking about it.
But see, this is what I want to emphasize again, is what did I do? I just said, hey, look right there. It's telling us this, period. That's all I got to say about it. But all I'm doing is I'm just systematizing. See, I'm saying, hey, when we talk about Satan, we're doing cherubology. And when we're doing that, we need to find out what we're told about them. And then we're applying that to these sort of questions. So there you go. There's a mystery revealed that was really just right in front of our faces all the time. If we just go, hey, it says it right there. This is one of the capabilities of cherubim. So that's how he did it.
A mystery revealed by systematic biblical paranormology. I love it.
There you go. I'll quote you on that.
Yeah. Ken, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate all the research you've done, and I have absolutely loved having you on this interview, and I love every time I hear you on another podcast. I absolutely love it. I'm very, very thankful for having a voice like yours in Christianity that's able to be so well studied and so articulate with what you say. And then also on top of that, being so, like I said, level-headed and not allowing just the end thing to pull you one direction or another, but sticking to what you truly believe in your heart. And I just really, really appreciate that about you. And I appreciate you being so honest and open and vulnerable with your information. And if you would like to share with our people where they can find you or find your books or anything you're up to, I would love for you to do that.
Sure. And let me thank you in turn. I found your questions very thoughtful and and very varied as well, so that you allowed us to get into various issues. So, yeah, you obviously put a lot of thought into those, and I appreciate you for doing that. And well, so this is for your future listeners. Go to truefreethinker.com, and everything is just there and available, all one word, True Free Thinker. And I say future because I paid somebody to make my website mobile friendly, and they pretty much destroyed it.
Oh man. Okay.
So it's down right now. It's been down for about a month. And so I guess for now, what you could do is go to Amazon and just search for Ken Ammi.
Yeah, you definitely, for all you listeners out there, you won't be disappointed. Ken's so well studied and so well researched, and just tells everything the way it is and sticks to the biblical truths that he discovers. And so you won't be disappointed in what you find that's his. I'll guarantee you that. Well, Ken, thank you so much for coming on, like I said. And I look forward to maybe one day in the future having you back on if you'd be up for it.
Oh, anytime.
All right, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you in turn. God bless you all.
God bless.